I'm Russ Muirhead. I represent Grafton District 12, which includes Etna, Lyme, and Hanover, New Hampshire. I was asked to introduce this bill at the request of several New Hampshireites who participated in the Citizens Assembly, a 3-day event at St. A's that was held last June, consisting of sort of equal numbers of Republicans, Democrats, Independents. A bunch of citizens got together, talked about politics, discussed lots of breakout groups and discussions and deliberation about problems and solutions. And the single ballot primary, which is what this bill would create, was one of the solutions that garnered 80% or more support among the delegates to this New Hampshire Citizens Assembly. And I'll let some of the participants to that say more about that in a second. The idea is very simple, that instead of having ballots on primary days where you can only vote for Republicans or only vote for Democrats, all the candidates would be on one ballot. And every voter would have the opportunity to vote for any candidate. A voter could vote for a Democratic candidate for governor, could vote for a Republican candidate for the executive council, Republican candidate, or maybe even an undeclared candidate, independent candidate for the House. So they could pick the best candidates regardless of what parties those candidates identified with. And the two top vote-getting candidates would go on to the general election in a district where there's one seat. That's the idea. It's very simple. Some people call it a blanket primary. Some people refer to it as the Alaska model because it's used in Alaska. And some might call it a nonpartisan primary. And the principle behind it is that when taxpayers pay for elections and the state administers elections, then every citizen should be able to vote for any candidate who's in that election. Right now, the state's paying for and administering a party selection process for the parties. It's a huge subsidy to the parties. And voters have to compress themselves into one of the parties in order to participate on primary day. As you well know, 40% of New Hampshireites do not identify with a party. And for those people, they have to say, at least for that moment that they're voting, well, I'm a partisan in order to participate in the primary. And there's, of course, a huge disconnect, not just in New Hampshire, but more so, I'd say, really in the country, between citizens and the people who represent them in legislatures, which is why public opinion of legislatures, which should be the most esteemed and most powerful branches, Article 1 is the legislature, should be the most esteemed and powerful branches in constitutional democracy, are the most despised branches of constitutional democracy today. And you look at New Hampshire, 40% of the state, 40% of the citizens refuse to identify with a party. How many independents or undeclared people are there in our legislature, in the House and the New Hampshire Senate? About 0%. So the disconnect is pretty obvious. This single ballot primary would aim to strengthen the connection between representatives and citizens. Some object that it's unfair for people who don't strongly identify with the party to select the party nominees that go forward into the general election. And, well, if that were true, we wouldn't allow undeclared voters to participate in primaries. And parties have the option of having party caucuses or party conventions. They could select their general election candidates the way they select their state party chairs. But if they want to engage the common sense of the broad citizenry through an election that's run by the state, then they should allow every citizen to vote for any candidate. Others object that this would invite what's called insincere voting or strategic voting, where, say, imagine, I as a loyal Democrat am in an election where I can vote to select, the Republican nominee. I might vote for what I think is the weakest or most obnoxious nominee, thinking that they won't do very well in the general election. So I vote for someone I don't like in order to saddle my opposition party with a weak candidate. Well, this ballot, the single ballot primary, would actually eliminate strategic voting. It would eliminate it because you can only do that when you're sure the candidate you most prefer is going to go forward into the general election. Like when on your side there's an incumbent who's unchallenged or something like that, then you might, I don't know, if you're really clever and extremely cynical, register with the opposition party so you can cast an insincere ballot. It doesn't happen much. It really is only kind of the political science geek club that does this kind of strategic voting. Most voters are in fact sincere and vote with integrity. But this reform would actually eliminate that by making every primary contest a competitive primary. You can never be certain that your preferred candidate is a shoo-in and is going to go on to the general election. So I think that by making primary elections more compelling, turnout will increase, and the common sense of the citizenry will be brought to bear with more effect on our elections. And I think that would be altogether salutary. And so that's why I viewed the request from some constituents from whom you'll hear and from delegates to the New Hampshire Citizens Assembly with such sympathy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.